God has a hard-on.
Perfect world, no dream, primitive cerebral.
He's a traitor! He's a sadist!
You're all going to die down here.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
I like what Gabriel Roberts, author of The Quest for Gnosis, said recently. A modern Gnostic, in my opinion, is simply a person who understands the illusion of our consensus reality, but also recognizes that we are here for a purpose. What we achieve is precisely in tandem with what we try. In other words, there is no substitute for hard work. Makes perfect sense, and that's one reason you have arrived to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Let's get started on some hard work, shall we?
You ever feel like nothing good was ever going to happen to you?
Yeah, and nothing did. So what? I'm alive, I'm surviving.
That's it. I don't want to just survive.
Aeon Byte is an initiation by conversation into the dark corners of myth, magic, and meaning. A crash course in cult, culture, and conspiracy. A virtuous virus invoking and informing history, loneliness, and heresy. Each week, I, your host Miguel Connor, commandeers your connection to bring the most accepted and rejected scholars and provocateurs to your attention. Fun, compelling, and deeply weird. This is the blow-your-mind cocktail party conversation you always wanted to listen in on. This is the desert of the real, a world without sin.
You clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger.
Did you know that there are 10 times more bacteria in your body than actual body cells? And 90% of the cells that makes us up aren't even human, but mostly fungi and bacteria. That there are millions of organisms eating us at this moment with the collective hunger of a Chris Christie and Rosie O'Donnell wedding banquet? Pretty startling, eh? So for you with New Age Kool-Aid in your blood, those with positive theism and atheism sensibilities, understand that finding who you are barely has to do with that monkey suit you're wearing.
I am in a world of shit.
You are a walking Chinese buffet, just as you and the rest of humanity lumber around, nibbling off the body of a screaming Gaia and the very essence of dying stars. You're someone or something's next meal, physically or mentally. That's your ultimate material purpose. Somehow your consciousness, your divine spark, was downloaded into a predatory universe where every sentient life form survives by the suffering and consuming of another sentient life form. Even you vegetarians and vegans must negate the intrinsic rights of plant life forms to survive for another Ashtanga yoga class or visit to Urban Outfitters.
I want to become a guru so girls will like me. Then I will like myself.
It's one of the great jokes of Samael, the blind god of Gnostic and Kabbalistic myth. So remember, as you lose forgetfulness here at Aeon Byte and enter the battlefields of the true seeker warrior, the wise words of the Gnostic influence Robert Frost when he said, "Forgive, O Lord, my little joke on thee, and I'll forgive thy great big one on me." The world of morality and ethics is no easier, perhaps even more of a slaughterhouse, instead devouring goodness and sanity and innocence, and certainly in the realm of the archons. Robert Frost also addressed this when he wrote, "How can we be just in a world that needs mercy, and merciful in a world that needs justice?"
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
Frost knew the double binds of reality, as did his spiritual ancestors, the ancient Gnostics. And the answer and solution to these psyche-pulverizing juggernauts is Gnosis, and the grace of a fallen Sophia. All of this is really the best news you'll ever hear. Once you catch the cry of suffering and loneliness from every consciousness across the cosmos, you'll never lose your compassion. Once you fully hold on to your compassion, you'll be whole, and you will hear the song of the Aeons urging you to create and invent, urging you to be loving to all, urging you to begin your long trek back home, leading others with you like the Pied Piper at the gates of dawn. Gnosis will draw you a map, and your fiery and irate divine spark will blaze the way through the labyrinths of birth and rebirth, armed with the pest dispenser of red pills. And you will escape, and you will return to a place higher than the gods.
Listen to me. You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you, never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. This is not the worst thing that can happen.
It isn't.
We don't need him.
We don't agree.
Fuck damnation, man. Fuck redemption. We are God's unwanted children. So be it.
You will write your own gospel and live your own myth. You will, as Blake promised, create your own system instead of being ruled by another man's system, or a God system, or a Google algorithm system, or evolution system. Better put than my doggerel words is the Nag Hammadi Library's 3 Stellas of Seth, which says, "The way of ascent is the way of descent. Know therefore, as those who live, that you have attained, and you taught yourself the infinite things."
I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin.
On this April 12th, the year of our Demiurge 2014, we continue with our Kabbalah for Heretics series, the first 2 available at YouTube and iTunes. Our astral guest is again a true pest dispenser of red pills. That is the wise and wonderful and profound Yakov-Leib. For more information on Yakov, please visit his website, donmeh-west.com. That is DONMEH-west.com. You'll find the complete ethos of Neo-Sabbatian and traditional Kabbalah in the form of articles, web lectures, links, and a legion of other resources. Yakov's homepage also has deals of Eleusinian dope on Vedanta and Jungian Gnosis that you'll find very edifying.
There he goes. One of God's own prototypes. A high-powered mutant of some kind never even considered for mass production. Too weird to live, and too rare to die.
In this series, we'll be discussing the left-hand path of God and theurgy and the shadow sides of divinity and a whole lot of evil side from divinity and humanity. Yes, believe it or not, God can sometimes be a dick.
What's God? Well, you know, when you want something really bad and you close your eyes and you wish for it, God's the guy that ignores you.
I should mention that in my previous ranting on what we are, or in any of my rantings, please take everything I say mythologically. The Gnostics didn't hate humanity, but certainly used the humanity sucks trope to make existentialist points. In fact, there is a case to be made that orthodoxy intrinsically hates humanity and all life. Either way, I borrow from the Gnostic ethos, and we all love all forms of consciousness. That includes the gods, since the Gospel of Philip does say we create our gods, and they create us.
I created you, Jack. I am your god.
Another argument that should be noted is that the gods don't really matter, because Gnosticism, like Buddhism, is ultimately atheist in a way. The gods, like bad art, are to be rejected. Even the alien god, or god above god I talk about, is more of a state of being, or consciousness, or mode of existence, represented again mythologically, that the Gnostics aspire to reach through theurgy and other disciplines. Are the gods real? Well, as real as reality is not, I guess. As real as you are not.
A reality is just what we tell each other it is. Sane and insane could easily switch places if the insane were to become the majority. You would find yourself locked in a padded cell, wondering what happened to the world.
Please support Aeon Byte in any way you can. Donations or any type of assistance are always a blessing, even if it's the many skills I don't have, like web design, marketing, YouTube videos, or virgin sacrifices. Please don't let me release the Kraken once again, as the old boy is getting a bit old. Your support is essential for Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Thank you for those who have supported this Hobbit venture via donation, buying me books, or downloading shows. If everyone simply donates a shekel or two every week, I can break even and keep bringing you the Gospel of Bill Hicks, the Testament of Russell Brand, and the eternal soundtrack of the counterculture.
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
But enough of my drivel. Let us do some hard work on the left-hand path of God and love humanity with our interview with Yakov. Before, let us end with a passage of the Corpus Hermeticum, which relates to my introduction. You must rip off the tunic that you wear, the garment of innocence, the foundation of vice, the bonds of corruption, the dark cage, the living death, the sentient corpse, the portable tomb, the resident thief, the one who hates through what he loves and envies through what he hates. And you'll relate to this with our interview with Yakov. I just know, my beloved truth seekers, and then you will do so many wonders.
Why'd you wear that armband? Because I've been mourning. For whom?
For God. If God exists, then he's a thing, or more likely a foot. A giant, all-knowing, all-powerful foot. I don't belong to the God is alive and hiding in Argentina club. But I believe in the devil, all right. You know why? Because the prick keeps doing commercials.
Original sin might be real.
Hello, operator.
Maybe it was something genetic.
Can you prove there's a foot?
There are some arguments from reason.
Are those the things we use to justify dropping atomic bombs on Japan?
Our fathers were models for God. If our fathers bailed, what does that tell you about God?
How shall we fuck off, oh Lord?
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined again by Yakov-Leib to continue our series, Kabbalah for Heretics. How you doing today, Yakov?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me on again.
It's truly our pleasure. So, Yakov, we talked about a few things we'd like to discuss, maybe some things we might have missed, and one of them is the left-hand path of God. What exactly is that in the Kabbalistic tradition?
It's very strong. And I think most people, or many people, are surprised to hear that. But the fact is that the left-hand path, theurgy, as I prefer to call it, is very prominent in Judaism, ancient Judaism as well. For example, many, many rituals are performed at night. There is the prayer to the moon, where men gather outside around some light source and literally pray to the moon. Even the Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the great-grandson of the great Baal Shem Tov, would lay on the grave of his great-grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, and sleep on it at night. Many of what Jesus did, many of the rituals he performed were at night. You see that some of the Jews come to visit him at night. So it is prominent. It just is not much discussed. And I think that it has a particularly prominent place in the Zohar. And in fact, right now we've been studying the Zohar for some over 20 years, every weekday morning on the internet, book by book, page by page, sentence by sentence. And the section we're in now is very heavily devoted to theurgy, to the theurgic intention of prayer. That prayer is not just to praise God, to get on the good side of God, to get brownie points and that kind of thing. It is literally to activate certain archetypal contents within the mind of God by the prayers that are being spoken. And that leads me to our understanding of theurgy, which I think underlines all of the systems, not just Kabbalah, not just left-hand path Christianity, because there is a left-hand path Christianity. Very prominent in Russia, and it was very, very prominent at the beginning of the Christian episode, very prominent, where semen was used to baptize because it was believed that Jesus did that. There is this strong idea of redemption through sin, not only in the Talmud and Judaism and other oral Torah, but in other spiritual systems as well. So the way we look at that is in a very Jungian way. The theurgy and the use of theurgy and the process of theurgy can be looked at in a very Jungian way, and that is archetypally. What the rituals and prayers and other activities that are performed out here in left-hand path spirituality, what they are instructions from the inner archetypes specifically to tell us how to activate them so that they may come forward. So that when we do certain things, for example, take the Mass, the Catholic Mass, that is very, very specifically an act of theurgy. You're transforming wine and bread into the flesh and blood of Jesus. That's magic. That's theurgic. But think of it this way. That process is actually an unconscious instruction from the archetype of the self within the collective unconscious for how to activate it out here. Am I making sense?
Yakov, some people might, or some listeners might not be familiar with exactly what theurgy means. Could you explain that?
Oh, magic. Magic with a K.
There you go. Okay, simple.
It's just a nice word for it's a more acceptable word for magic, because it is. If you look at religion, it all gets down to magic. Really, Catholicism, Judaism. Where you see less of it is in Protestantism, for example. Really. There was, and in Buddhism, because Buddhism is to Hinduism what Protestantism was to the Catholic Church. It's a kind of cleaning up of all that. But still, there is a very, very magical, with a K, undercurrent to all religion. Now, to get back to what I was saying about the theurgic basis of it, what's the value in knowing that? For us Neo-Sabbateans, the value in knowing that is it gives very direct, very personal, very powerful use of this theurgy, of this magical ritual and rite, ceremonial magic, for example. For example, in one of the great works of the Talmud, the Pirkei Avot, Wisdom of the Fathers, it says, and I'm quoting from memory now, so I may not be totally correct, but I think I am, do God's will as if it were your will, so God may do your will as if it were his. Now, if that isn't an instruction in left-hand path spirituality, I don't know what is. There is also, in the Talmud, another example where it says, it's talking about the Sabbath, and there is on the Jewish Sabbath the concept of muksa, that is to say, the things that are used to do what we are forbidden to do are also forbidden to touch. For example, it's forbidden to cut paper on the Sabbath. Therefore, a scissors or a knife is forbidden to touch on the Sabbath. It's muksa. In the Talmud, there is a passage in the Masechta Shabbat. There is a passage that says it is forbidden to touch a pile of palm fronds on the Sabbath. But, it says, if one is to stand over those palm fronds before the Sabbath begins and say, these palm fronds are not forbidden to me on the Sabbath, they will not be forbidden to you on the Sabbath, and moreover, you can not only touch them, but you could lie upon them as a couch. That's an act of theurgy. That's an act of magic. That's transformative magic. And it really contains another important aspect to this magical idea, and that is, in Hebrew, kavana, intention. It must be done with intention. I am doing this in order to transform these palm fronds. I'm not doing it just casually. I know what I'm doing it for the reasons I'm doing it, and I'm doing it with the full expectation that it will result in what I want it to result in. That's kavana. And when one takes that and incorporates it into one's own spiritual work, what that says is we have a very direct line of communication to the inner archons, the archetypes, whatever you want to call them. They're there. Jung says they're real. They're autonomous. They're real. We do not create them. If anything, they create us. They're in there, as Jung points out, just seeking to get out. They're not in there trying to do the best for us. They're in there, Jung points out, literally to do the best for themselves, which is to bring themselves out of the darkness into the light. And anything they can get us to do to aid them in that, they will do. Jung points out that that has some very strong dangers in it. The danger is if they're just doing that, they'll do anything, even to damage us. Therefore, it's necessary to have what Jung calls the Auseinandersetzung, this communication, this tete-a-tete, this very living communication with them, so that you are collaborating with them, and therefore making it less likely that they're going to injure you. When we look upon the left-hand path as being that, that gives us a whole new idea of what we're dealing with when we deal with the left-hand path. And it doesn't even have to be called the left-hand path anymore. It's just dealing with God and the transformative process that takes place when I, as me, establish a living communication with thou in there, the archetype.
It's very true. I know Jung did say, I must have a dark side if I am to be whole.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, one of the things that really disturbs me is the way many people misinterpret that to mean, well, we're both good and bad. Well, yes, that's what he said, but he's saying something far more than that. If you read Answer to Job, which I believe is his greatest work, and my mentor, his own student, Jung's own student, was my mentor, James Kirsch, helped me to understand What he's saying is that God is evil as well as good. That is, God that everyone goes to worship is evil as well as good. It isn't just that there is good in order for there to be evil and evil for there to be good. God itself is evil. And that we must acknowledge and recognize that side of God for its productive and its destructive aspects if we expect to do anything in relationship to God. And what you see in the left-hand path, not only of Kabbalah but of other systems, is this acknowledgement of God's evil side, as it's called in Hebrew, the Sitra Achra, the other side, the left-hand column of the 3 columns of the 10 Sephiros. It's God's evil side. It's not my evil side. It's God's evil side. And acknowledging that and recognizing that explains why it says to us the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Why should it say that? Why shouldn't it say the love of God is the beginning of wisdom? Because, indeed, what we can encounter and most often do at the first encounter is this fearsome, evil, dark side of God that wants to kill us. And we have to know how to acknowledge that and how to deal with that in a living, real relationship. And, if I could call it this, a conversation. Otherwise, we're going to get smacked on the ass, just as Job was. Look at Job. I mean, there is no Satan. I mean, Jung points out very clearly that Satan is only another word for this left-hand side of God. Look at what God is doing to Job. All of that pain and suffering inflicted on Job is being inflicted on him by God. Why? So that God can make sure that Job is a good and righteous person and loves him. Well, if that's what God is doing, that obviously comes from his evil, thoughtless side. Because if he were so omniscient, he would know. He wouldn't have to put Job through all this crap.
But doesn't also God come to some self-realization in answer to Job?
Oh, yes. Yes. And you know what it is? I'll quote to you Job's self-realization at the end. Job says to God, after all this, I knew you by hearsay. I am the man who obscured your designs with my empty-headed words. Everything I knew about you before this, I knew by hearsay. But now, having seen you with my own eyes, as you are, I repent and take back everything I have said, and in dust and ashes I repent. Job's realization is that God can be a killer as well as a lover, and that what Job was encountering was God's evil, dark side. Job, right at the end of Job, I think it's Job 54, Job acknowledges this, and God rewards him for having realized that. Yes, God is saying, you realize the truth. First of all, that you're shooting your mouth off about me until you actually experience me. And until you actually experience the dark, evil side of me, you're actually just shooting your mouth off. That's what's happening here in Job. And so, here, let me get my...
So what Job experiences is individuation.
That's what Jung calls it, yes. But it's the individuation that realizes, hey, this God I'm dealing with is not always the God that kisses my boo-boos. It's the God that gives me the boo-boos that he then kisses. And if I don't know that, if I don't realize that, and if I don't deal with God from that understanding, I'm going to get my ass kicked the way Job did. The book of Job begins, there was once a man in the land of Uz called Job, a sound and honest man who feared God and shunned evil. Then, however, later on, it says, one day the sons of God came to attend on Yahweh, and among them was Satan. Satan is one of the angels, according to this text. Satan in Hebrew simply means adversary. Here it means the adversarial mind of God. God is sitting there contemplating Job, and he says to himself, yes, boy, what a guy that Job is. There's nobody loves me more. And then all of a sudden the other thought comes to him, well, yes, but that's only because you give him so much. And that's what happens here. It says, one day the sons of God came to attend on Yahweh, and among them was Satan. So Yahweh said to Satan, where have you been? Around the earth, he answered, roaming about. So Yahweh asked him, did you notice my servant Job? Here is God in this back and forth thinking about Job. He's thought about how wonderful Job is, and then the idea comes to him, well, maybe not. Maybe he's not so wonderful. And it goes on, there is no one like him on the earth, a sound and honest man who fears God and shuns evil. Yes, Satan said. Yes, the other side of God said, but Job is not God-fearing for nothing, is he? Have you not put a wall around him and his house and all his domain? Take all that away, God says to himself, and I don't think Job will bless you anymore. And so that's what happens. God takes everything away from Job and inflicts all of this on Job in a very living life and death encounter. And Job refuses to listen to his Edomite friends who are sitting around him, the three of them, saying to him, God does not punish people for nothing. You have sinned, and that is why God is punishing you. And Job's position constantly is, that's not so. God has that side of himself that can punish with no reason. And I am looking for an intercessor to plead my case with God. And he does. And then at the end, there is the realization you talked about. But it's not the realization that Christians and Jews and most other people want to believe Job realized. What does he realize? It says in Job 42, this was the answer Job gave to Yahweh. Job is about to tell Yahweh God what he has realized. He says, I know that you are all-powerful. What you conceive, you can perform. I am the man who obscured your designs with my empty-headed words. I have been holding forth on matters I do not understand, on marvels beyond me and my knowledge. I knew you then, when I was simply shooting my mouth off, only by hearsay. But now, having seen you directly with my own eyes, I retract all I have said, and in dust and ashes I repent. Job finally realizes the evil side of God by experience, not by hearsay. And now he knows God fully. And God says back to him, when Job said all this to Yahweh, Yahweh turned to the three Edomites who have been telling Job that obviously God is punishing him because he was sinned and not because he just punishes people for the sake of punishing them. He turns to those three and he says, I burn with anger against you and your two friends for not speaking truthfully about me as my servant Job has done. Am I being clear?
Very clear, very clear.
And then he goes on. Now wait, then he goes on. So now, Yahweh says, go find 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and take them back with you to my servant Job, and offer them as a sacrifice for yourself, while Job, my servant, offers prayers for you. I will listen to him with favor, and excuse your folly for not speaking properly about me, as my servant Job has done. By this realization of Job that God has this dark, evil, murderous side, and loves God even at the recognition of that, that's important. Even though God is kicking the shit out of him and trying to kill him, Job still loves God. And when God realizes that, that's when he turns to these three and says, you don't talk about me the way my servant Job does, and I'm going to punish you. And in addition, I have raised my servant Job up to the status of an intercessor, a Christos, a Redeemer. I will forgive all of you because he will pray for you. And why will I forgive all of you because he prays for you? Because he has indeed realized my true nature. That's what I had to say about that.
It's very fascinating. But in essence, as you've said before, unless I'm seeing some things wrong, once we see the darkness of God, Is that the beginning of us being able to co-redeem the universe with God, as the Talmud says? It's the beginning of wisdom.
Exactly. But more important than that, here's the real theurgy of it. Before we begin the process of redeeming the world, now listen, we begin to redeem God itself. God itself, we're told in the Kabbalah, in very ancient books of Kabbalah, has fallen into disunity by the act of creation. Now there is no longer just God. Now there is God, and outside of him, man. And so what was once a unity is now a disunity. And that God is suffering that disunity, struggling to restore it back to its previous unity. It cannot do that itself. It needs man to do it. The Baal Shem Tov speaks to this. Give me a moment and let me fish up something the Baal Shem Tov says. All right, and I'm talking about this in relation to what you're talking about redeeming the world. What I'm saying is, and what you'll hear the Baal Shem Tov saying, is that before the world can be saved and healed, God must be saved and healed. Then the world will be saved and healed. But first, God, because God is the source of everything, including our suffering. And our suffering comes out of the suffering of God. This is a quote from Martin Buber's great work, Hasidism and Modern Man, and it's from pages 88 to 89. God has fallen into duality through the created world and its deed, into the essence of God, which is withdrawn from its creatures. Only prayer that takes place for the sake of redeeming the feminine aspect of God, of healing God, truly lives, quote, through his need and his want. Man knows the want of God, and he prays that the want of God will be satisfied, and that through him, the praying man, the unification of God with his own presence will take place. Now listen, it says, man should know that his suffering comes from the suffering of God. He is only one of its limbs, and the stilling of God's need is the only true stilling of man's. Quote, he does not think about the satisfaction of his needs, neither the lower nor the higher ones, that he might not be like him who cuts the eternal plant. Rather, he does all for the sake of the want of God, and all will be resolved of itself, and his own suffering too will be stilled out of the stilling of the higher roots of God itself.
It's an amazing passage.
Well, it's not just there, it's everywhere. It's very, very foundational to our own Neo-Sabbatean Kabbalah. We are not concerned with healing ourselves, with healing others, with healing the world. We are concerned with healing God through magic, through theurgy.
What's fascinating, as you mentioned, is that we didn't have to wait until Christ came along. According to Job himself, got this Christ-like abilities. God is saying all of us can be Christ and, intercessors.
Yes, and if you read Jung carefully in answer to Job, it isn't Job that realizes that. God, now this is quoting Job very directly, quoting Jung very directly in answer to Job. God, out of his encounter with Job, realizes that Job is morally superior to him, God. God realizes that his creation is more conscious of God than God is of himself. And so, Jung points out, God decides the only thing to do is to catch up with his creation by incarnating in him. So the reason for the incarnation is not to redeem man, but to redeem God itself.
So we work together.
We work together for the sake of God first, and then ourselves. Anything else is ego. When people say, I want to know God. I want to know God. Well, why? Why do you want to know God? Oh, because once I know God, my suffering will end. I'll be at peace. Well, that's perfectly reasonable. Everybody says that. But take a look at that. The only reason you want to know God is so that you can be at peace. If that's not ego, I don't know what is. That I don't want to know God for my sake. I want to know God because God has told me in dreams and visions and in my readings that I've given you here that it's suffering and that only I and my fellow human beings can heal it because we stand outside of it and we are more conscious of it than it is of itself.
And nobody's thinking of God suffering their own. Woe is me.
No, everybody's thinking of the... Look, and that's understandable. That's certainly understandable. But one of the things that I think we teach that is so contrary to what everyone else thinks and believes and practices is that's not the way to approach it. Heal God. And how? How can I heal God? Through magic with a K. And we have those systems that we use to do that kind of tikkun, that kind of mystical healing. That is left-hand path. So the question, well, how can an insignificant person like me heal such a great thing like God is an irrelevant question and is not on point. It doesn't understand what's being said. The lesser can heal the greater. There's no question about that. And we see that also stated many times in the Zohar and other works of oral Torah.
And mythologically, this is presented through the breaking of the first tree in certain systems.
Absolutely. God bless Jung for pointing all that archetypal backup out. And yes, it's in the breaking of the tree. Look at Hinduism. And as you know, I formally studied and converted to the four major religions in
right.
following the steps of Shabtai Tzvi and Jacob Frank, my predecessors. And if we look at Hinduism, which I love, if I were to say there's any one religion that represents my heart, it would be Hinduism. Look what Hinduism says. It says that in the beginning, there is this first chakra, the crown, and it is both male and female. What happens? The female divides away from the male and goes down and creates all the lower chakras and then curls up and goes to sleep at the bottom of the Sushumna. And what we must do as people is awaken that sleeping feminine aspect of God and raise her back up to the masculine God from which she has fallen so that God can be healed. We must do that through Kundalini Hinduism. So we see it very strong. We see it very strongly. Listen, we see it very strongly in Gnosticism.
Oh yeah,
very strongly. Hang on, let me grab something to quote from Gnosticism. All right, I'm going to quote something from the Gospel of Thomas, from the Nag Hammadi Library. And let me just say a little something about the Gospel of Thomas. All the four Gospels and the other books that accompany them have been totally altered and changed over the last 2,000 years by the church fathers who wanted to create their own religion. And we know that from a very scientific study made by a group called the Jesus Seminar. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, they're magnificent. And what they point out is that, bottom line, 80% of the Gospels were not as written originally. They represent totally changed, false words. When we look at the Gospel of Thomas, what do we see? We see something that scholars believe was actually written down as that man, Yeshua HaNatzri, spoke it. Just like the Quran was being written down as Muhammad spoke it, the Gospel of Thomas is Didymus Thomas writing down the statements of Jesus, Yeshua HaNatzri, as he is saying them. Then what happens is most significant. Those Gospels, all of them, including the Gospel of Thomas, the Gnostics bury to protect them. So for 2,000 years, all of those Gnostic Gospels, including this very authentic Gospel of Thomas, have been taken away from the hands of those who would change it. And we see it totally unchanged. It is indeed the living word of Yeshua HaNatzri, if we are to believe the scholars and so forth. I do. So that what we see, and Elaine Page, makes a very strong point for this herself in her study of the Gospel of Thomas. It's not just me being crazy. So what we see when we look at the Gospel of Thomas is, is what Jesus really said, what he really taught. And what is that in relation to what we're talking about here, about healing God? Listen to what he says. And I'm sure you know this, and all your readers know it. I just want to bring it up as related to what I'm talking about. In Thomas 22, it says, Jesus saw infants being suckled. He said to his disciples, these infants being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. They said to him, shall we then, as children, enter the kingdom? Now, here's the theurgy. Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that male not be male, nor the female female, then you will have the kingdom. Do you see how that's related to what I'm talking about? Man must heal God before he can enter the kingdom. Straight from the mouth of Yeshua HaNatzri.
And Yaakov, in other parts of the Old Testament, this also explains, as you say, God's behavior. You talk about Moses when God attempts to kill him in other places.
Oh, absolutely. And God is totally irrational in the Old Testament. I mean, God is, in the Old Testament, psychotic. God, and I don't mean that to call him a name. I mean, there are people who say that now, but what they're doing is name-calling. I'm not name-calling. I'm describing it. God is a bipolar psychotic. At that stage of its own evolution of consciousness, because God's consciousness is evolving also. At that very early stage of its consciousness, God is a bipolar psychotic. It flies back and forth from one side to the next. It flies back and forth from being cruel and punishing and irrational to being loving and caring and calming. And we see that very clearly in the Old Testament. And we see also, Jung points out, God apologizing frequently to man for being that way.
And here's a question I had for you if you wanted to entertain it. I haven't seen it, but the new Noah movie is sort of brought Kabbalah into the forefront. I don't know if you're going to if you want this or not, because then you're going to have to dress all this.
I won't. I have no interest in watching it. I think it has as much to do with Kabbalah as my laundry list does in the morning.
Unless you're trying to release light from your
laundry. Well, a lot of people talk about that. But just because you use the words doesn't mean you're doing the same thing. You know, a Chevy and a Cadillac are not the same simply because they're both cars. So when someone talks about, oh yes, Yakov-Leib, we know what you're saying. We've got to heal this terrible sin in us. No, you don't know what I'm saying. You're not hearing what I'm saying. I read something a friend posted on Facebook, a poem by someone who has made himself into, he's not a good poet at all, but has made himself into a fairly well-known spiritual poet. And he talks about, and God finally said to me, do you really want to love me? And I said yes. And God said to me, then you must kiss this blemish on my body. And I thought, wow, someone who understands. And the speaker says, yes, Lord, I will. And the God says back, this blemish is all the unfair unkindness of mankind, all the evil that mankind does to each other. Do you see what I'm saying? The blemish on God is God's blemish, not us. And just because this guy is talking about God's blemish doesn't mean he's saying the same thing I'm saying.
And so from a biblical perspective, basically, it's simply having the attitude that God is suffering, he's in duality, all these actions in the Old Testament are, again, even I like it when you're quoting these very established and, of course, very honored Martin Buber, and he's talking about words like duality and feminine side of women. He didn't get in any hot water for that. That's pretty amazing.
You bet. Yeah. Well, I've gotten into plenty of hot water, as you may know. My life at the age of 80 has been one of immense cleanliness because I'm in such hot water all the time. But I believe what I say is firmly based on what others have said. It's just the way I put it together that makes it different. And it is different. It is. But yes, I agree. And what we see in Yeshua HaNatzri, Jesus, is that man is finally reconciling God. For example, let me say something. Jesus goes to be baptized by John. Jewish baptism, then as now, is only for the sake of cleansing whatever sins are in the person going under the water. Jews still baptize themselves, their dishes, everything. The question then can be raised, why the hell did Jesus need to get baptized? If he was the Christ, if he was the representation of God on earth, and if God is free of sin, why did this vessel of God need to be baptized? Because God needs to be baptized of its own sin before the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, can come out. That's what we see in the baptism of Jesus. And I think that's a fairly Gnostic point of view also, if I'm not mistaken. I think the Gnostics say something very similar to that, at least.
Oh yeah, very much, very much.
So there you see. Well, look at how Yahweh is perceived in Gnosticism as an evil, terrible, terrible false god, and constantly they're trying to say, "You are not God, Yahweh. You are not God." Oh yes, I am God, Yahweh says.
Yeah, and in some mythologies, God is redeemed along with mankind when they unify in the pleroma and so forth.
Absolutely. And that doesn't represent any discovery on the part of these mythologies. It represents a transmission of that archetypal collective unconscious truth. It comes out as a truth in myth, legend, fairy tale, dreams, which is why we place such a heavy emphasis on dreams in our Neo-Sabbatean work. Because dreams are a very powerful way of establishing this unity with God. Because what we do when we really work on dreams is to establish a relationship between me out here and God in there. That's the main benefit of a dream. It's not so that, oh, look how holy I am, look how advanced I am. No, it's you're establishing a relationship to God, a living relationship. God is speaking to you in dreams, literally, and you are answering him by what you do when you're awake. Let me give you an example. And I swear to you, that this is true. I've been thinking a lot about this interview, of course, and what will we talk about, and so forth. And how will I conduct myself? And so, last night, I had a very, very vivid dream. I dreamt I was standing on floor level, and above me was like a balcony. And there, the mother and the father, as my mother and father, but I knew in the dream that they were the mother and father, were standing. And I said to them, oh, I'm going to be interviewed by Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio tomorrow morning. And they proceeded to tell me how I should act. And I took that as criticism on their part because there's my own goddamn ego. And then standing next to me is this beautiful young woman. And she's showing me how to use the phone when I'm being interviewed by you. And I say to her, look, this is the third time I've been interviewed by them. I don't need you to tell me how to use the phone. The point is, they were there instructing me. And the point is, my ego was there operating. And if I don't acknowledge my own ego and see what it was doing in there, I would not have apologized to them this morning when I woke up. But do you see what I mean? There they were. God was instructing me what to do, both as male and female and as female. So dreams are a very important part of this tikkun, this healing of God that we talk about, the left-hand side.
And as you mentioned, this is very serious. I remember reading somewhere in one of Jung's book that if you don't listen to these forces, they'll kill you. They'll make you jump on the street or something. They'll say, you're not doing what we're saying. We're going to another incarnation. Bye.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. Oh, he makes that point again and again. If you don't listen to them and brave them out, you've got to be courageous in the face of them. If you don't listen to them and show courage in the face of them and establish a cooperation with them, they're liable going to kill you. You know, and look what that means. That means you're going to be walking the streets screaming at the lampposts and preaching to the fire hydrants. That's how they kill you. They destroy the ego.
Then they find another avatar for their energy.
And they find every birth, the whole process starts all over again. With every new child, the whole process starts all over again. The evolution of God's consciousness and my consciousness as a partnership. And my growing awareness of that dark left-hand path of God. With every birth, it starts all over again. In biology, they call it ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Do you remember that from biology in high school and college? Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Each new birth, each new baby, and each new birth goes through all the stages of birth preceding it, even in the womb. Same is true spiritually.
And basically, our karma is already there when we're born, the mechanism of our doom and redemption.
Everything is there. Everything is there. It's all there. It's a question of establishing a knowledge of it in there, free from we can make it the ego. The ego is both a great asset and a great detriment. The Bhagavad Gita says, transcending ego by ego. It's not a question of doing away with my ego. It's a question of acknowledging it, understanding it, seeing it, and being able to bust it when it's misbehaving. I have an enormous ego. You know, I love when people point out, you're so egotistical. Well, tell me something else I don't already know. I know that, and I'm on good terms with my ego. So that my understanding of all this, my bringing out of what's in there to out here, must be done with what Ramakrishna calls a ripened ego. A ripened ego. Ego, yes, but ripened.
So this New Age idea of destroying your ego is not good advice.
Oh my God, I think it's terribly dangerous. And Jung, I know for a fact Jung would agree. I mean, it's terribly dangerous. And at the same time, the New Age mentality says we've got to destroy the ego, but I am God. Well, what do you mean you're God? Well, I am God, me. Well, you're saying the ego in you is God.
And they don't want to acknowledge God's big ego that needs help either.
That they don't want to acknowledge that anything is greater than they are. The ego cannot and will not, except with help, acknowledge that there is anything greater than it, including God. So what's the answer? I am God. If God is everyone, there is no God. If everything is God, there is no God. Plain and simply. And it's the ego's way of establishing its own priority over the God that does exist and denying its existence. It's a tough road to get to know God. It's very, very, very difficult and very, very dangerous. And not everyone is ready to do it. Jung talks about the elect. Do you remember? He constantly talks about the elect.
Which is a dirty word today. Nobody wants to.
Which is a dirty word today. Buddhism talks about the elect, which is a dirty word today. Not everyone is ready or prepared or meant for this kind of work on behalf of God. It's just, sorry, that's just the way it is. You will be perhaps in the next lifetime, but where you're at is you're preparing to be that person in each lifetime. The elect are those who have gone through countless, thousands upon thousands of lifetimes of suffering and hardship and work to now be elect. It's not because they say they're elect. It's because they have been through constant reincarnations that bring them to that level of electedness, if I may say. And those who are not elect, it's not their fault. It's because they have not gone through sufficient lifetimes to become one of the elect. Now, the New Age doesn't understand that or want to understand that. It's a very dirty word.
And I think in one Gnostic school of thought, it's more of the attitude is, I am so sick of being here and floundering. I'm finally going to get to work because I'm tired.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And that's the same as Hinduism, moksha. I'm going to become liberated because I'm sick and tired of being in the world. Well, that's not realization. That's ego realization. But it's ego. I don't like the world. Therefore, I'm going to do everything I can so I don't have to come back again. That's really the foundation of what most people think Hinduism is about. Think of it, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
But that's not what Hinduism is about. It's about doing that and coming back. What do you think a bodhisattva is? To teach. The point is not to become liberated so you don't have to come back in the world. It's to become liberated so you can come back and help others to go through the process of surviving the world so that you can then heal God, which is what the Bodhisattva has done.
And the Christ.
And well, you take the words right out of my mouth. And that's what Jesus is teaching to do. The Christ does that. He makes the two one, male and female in particular. And there's a reason for that.
And Yakov, in Islam, is there similar thoughts?
Islam is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, let's, by all means. But Islam is totally different. And when I talk of Islam, I'm not talking about the religion of Islam. That religion is just as evil as the Christian religion is, as the Jewish religion is. It's the Quran that we cherish and follow. But Islam as a religion is a corruption of the Islam, just as Judaism and even Kabbalah as religions are corruptions of the Zohar and the Old Testament. And Christianity, as we see it, is a total corruption of the Gospels. We see that very clearly in Christianity, Judaism, but it's also true in Islam, I'm afraid.
All right, Yakov, I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to shoot my mouth off.
Oh, it was our pleasure, and we look forward to having you on, maybe to discuss Islam.
I'd love to, because it was very important to Shop Type 3, of course. Very, very important. Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.